Today we're going to be talking about the hopes and the opportunities for the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation and where philanthropy is headed. We're so excited to celebrate our 60 years, and we're glad that you're here to join us. And this is part 2 of our conversation. I'm here with Christopher Lemon and Frances Todoro-Hargreaves, and we're going to be talking about the future of the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation and what that means to Washtenaw County. So, one of the things that we talked about some of the challenges, but I'd love for us to talk about some of the opportunities that we see for the future of the foundation. One of the things that I've been talking about with staff is just this understanding that we have linked fates. I think because Michigan is a home rule state, there's always been the thought of, what happens in my village? What happens in my township? And I think part of the future is having a real strong regional conversation about what happens across the county and how what happens in Ypsilanti matters to the person living in Manchester and how what's happening in Dexter matters to the person living in Milan. So I'm curious, what are some of the other opportunities that you see?
We're seeing more and more of the municipalities looking at regional planning together and take affordable housing and the idea of, who's doing what. And they're being more open about it. What are their targets? How much they want to build? And those are bringing opportunities for us to be able to say, okay, we can focus on that in this area, focus on that in Milan, in Dexter, and getting to know who we need to in those areas, again, with the relationships. And I think the regional idea of the transportation that they're working together to connect even Ann Arbor to Detroit, Ypsi to Detroit, really getting that opportunity open. So I think we're hearing more and more talk of community leaders working together, and I think that's going to give us a lot of opportunity.
Thank you, Frances.
That's a really great perspective on it. I think that through having a lot of conversations with elected officials, both at a county level, city level, and even a township level, most would say that they don't know what the answers or the solutions are to a lot of issues. And that can be pretty daunting for an elected official because most people think that, well, that's your job, right? You're supposed to be a subject matter expert in everything. Therefore, you should just be solving this problem. And I mean, that's what parents do, on the daily. But it's different when you're talking about your family versus the well-being of everyone. And when you talk about linked fates, I think that sometimes that we don't know what to do. Like there's so many potential allies. There's so much data, right? There's almost this paralysis by analysis where people just go, I know something needs to be done, but I don't know what to do, right? But the reality is that our fates are linked. And I think that you said like a regional approach. I'm just going to refer to that as coordination, right? And I think that this is maybe where we're not as strong within Washtenaw County because a lot of times, what happens in Chelsea, happens in Chelsea. What happens in Dexter happens in Dexter. And you can name that off to, Milan, you can name Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor, you name it. And every community is its own community. It has its own unique aspects, culture, personality. But once again, there's so much that is similar, and I'll just say, without going too far back, my first work at the foundation was working with youth, ages 5 to 18. And then I made the jump to supporting older adults as my portfolio of work. Well, the reality is that the issues that the youth were facing were the same issues that many of the older adults were facing as well, right? And so that really helped me to understand that, okay, so the solutions don't always have to be super complicated, but it's just a matter of understanding because we're all facing the same one no matter where you live, right? But like a transportation solution in Chelsea could look very similar to one in Ypsilanti, but there are going to be unique differences. But how can we address that through coordination of services? And once again, there's, it's going to take specific roles that entities play. There's going to be specific resources that certain organizations can bring. As a foundation, we can't bring human power to the table, but we can bring capital to support, right? The county can bring resources. The county can also bring policy, just like townships can, right. When it comes to things like childcare. Well, maybe a certain policy needs to be in place to make bringing childcare opportunities into Ypsilanti and, Dexter a little bit easier. But we need to be having those, we need a larger table. We need to be having more conversations to understand what a coordinated, more regional approach to solutions, And so I think that's, I think you really hit on the head with that.
It's interesting that you juxtapose Dexter with Ypsilanti, because as I talk with other folks in the field, we talk about the fact that oftentimes the issues that people are facing in rural communities are almost identical to what people are facing in urban communities. Mm-hmm. Now, as you pointed out, you might tweak them just slightly, but the digital divide is real. Access to transportation, access to healthcare, access to food, all of those things are similar, and they have some of the same challenges for some of the same reasons. And so as we begin to help folks see what they have in common versus where they might say, well, what do we have that's even comparable? It's like, oh, but you have a lot. Mm-hmm. And being the hub for that kind of communication, I think, is another role that we can play. I also think about the fact that we have moved from simply being a source of funding to be a source of so many other resources. So Frances, you brought up the fact of like, hey, we can use our influence, make a call, be a connector. Are there other ways that, at the foundation where we see philanthropy shifting right now, as opposed to just being the grant dollars? I was having a conversation with someone recently, and I said, we have dollars under management, assets under management. We also have assets under influence. Mm-hmm. And that is another way for us to look at our role. I'm curious about what your thoughts are on that.
Because we're a funder, and I think that because we've positioned ourselves as being partners in the work and having these relationships, I think that, our, to use an old, analogy, like our Rolodex is fairly large, right? I mean, we've got a lot of analogy. It is. We've got, and not the watch. But we have so many people that we're in conversation with across sectors, right? And I know that even myself, sometimes I make the assumption that everyone has the depth of connections that we do, and that's not always the case, right? And so I think where there's great opportunity right now for us is to find ways to continue to be making those connections. And once again, that's simply but we don't know what connections to make unless we're having those conversations. Right. And so this sounds really simple, because at the end of the day, it's not a complicated plan, right? It doesn't require, 10 years of strategy building. What it really takes is making sure that we understand, like, what does it truly mean to be in relationship with cross-sector partners, and then making sure that we understand we're not just listening for what we want to hear. We need to truly listen to their words to understand what is it that you need to address this issue. And then let's see if we have individuals that we know with various resources, right? What's the time, money, expertise, whatever that is. How can we bring them to the table so that everyone's not doing everything themselves, right? Let's lean into what others do and do well, and then move on from there. Does that make sense?
Oh, completely. Frances, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that what makes us so unique too is, we have our priorities as a foundation, but we're also relatively neutral in the sense that we're going to respect what Dexter's community wants, and we're also going to respect what Milan's community wants. So we're coming in there as that neutral body to say, okay, what can we do to help you do the next right thing? That's what we're looking for. And if that's making the connection with, XYZ company or ABC company in another location, that's what's best for that community. And that's what we're there for. Is we're not there to judge or say, no, we think this will work better for you. No, we're there just to be that neutral party and to help further the best thing for them.
It's interesting when you talked about not being dictatorial and how people are going to use the money. We talk about trust-based philanthropy a lot, right? We're going to give you the money and let you do what you think is best. I had the benefit of participating in an exercise with a bunch of other foundation professionals. And in the exercise, this was years ago, early in my career, they told us, the facilitator said, okay, we're going to divide you into two groups. This group, you go out into the hallway. I was part of the group that stayed inside. Boy, I wish I'd been in that hallway group, because what they told us inside, they said, okay, you guys, we want you on your knees, and you can't speak to the other group unless they ask you a question. If they ask you a question, you can only answer the question that they've asked. And so the other group comes in and like philanthropists are like, oh, we're here to solve your problem. And in true form, the first thing they did was they started asking people if they wanted water and fanning people because the room was a little hot. And I kept thinking to myself, if you just ask me what I want, I'm going to tell you, can you bring me a chair? That's what I really want. And that's a lesson that has stayed with me is philanthropy is supposed to listen, not dictate, but you can't listen if you're not in a relationship. And part of that, and I'd love for you guys to talk about this, is the future of philanthropy is understanding that those conversations aren't always going to make us feel good. And that there's going to be pushback. And we're going to hear stuff like, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting that to be the solution. Can you talk about some of that? And because I think that's also a shift for philanthropy to not just say, here's your money and here's what I want you to do with it, but talk to me a little bit about what that trust-based conversation looks like.
Oh man, that's I think the first thing that came to my mind was, you look hot, here's some ice cream. Well, actually I'm lactose intolerant, but thanks. So now I have a resource that I can't use. Right? And we kind of say that
That's
jokingly, but that happens, right?
Yeah.
And so we make assumptions, we project what we think, right? I'm going to lean into the trust-based aspect for a second because that is something, one of the major reasons why I've stayed with the foundation as long as I have is because of trust-based philanthropy. It takes time to build trust, right? If a funder who, once again, if they have the purse strings and they say, hey, tell us how your program went, most organizations, and I've had a lot of candid, offline conversations with nonprofit leaders, have said, well, we're going to tell you everything's great. Right. And I had one leader in particular a number of years ago, and I've said this 1,000 times, and I'm sure most people have heard me say this, but they referred to the year-end report as the Facebook facade of philanthropy, where everything is great, everything is awesome, we served everybody and didn't have a single issue. And when he said that, it hit me like a slap across the face, in a good way. It was a wake-up slap, right? And it was like, we don't want that, because first of all, if they feel like they have to do that, then they don't trust us as partners in the work. So that's the first thing that we need to address. How are we showing up? But the other part of it is that if we're getting the rainbows and roses year-end report, well, we're not actually getting the true narrative about what's happening in our community, which means that we're uninformed. And so then if we double down into our current processes, we're not actually getting to the root causes or the real issues that our community members need to have addressed. And so through, years of work on our reporting side, we've changed our reporting to invite organizations, like, tell us where you struggled, like what were the hurdles that you tried to address. And initially there was a lot of intrepidation. You would see, nope, everything was great. And through a lot of offline conversations, we've helped them to understand that we need to understand what your hurdles were. We're not going to hold that against you, because show me anything in life that goes without off without a hitch. Literally nothing in my life. But we now use our year-end reports as an opportunity for us as an organization to learn. We're not using it as an evaluation tool to place judgment on the nonprofit, but it's like, oh, wow, they really struggled with transportation. I'll just do a really quick example. For years, we would never fund transportation when I was working in the youth space. It wasn't an official policy, but it was something that we just said, we want all of our dollars to primarily go towards, the youth that we're serving with that program. And through being in conversation with these, nonprofit leaders offline, I was like, so how did it go? Well, it wasn't that great because we can't get the kids to these programs. And I started to hear that over and over and over again. And when enough people say it, you go, oh, wait a minute. We're actually the problem right now, because we're not helping to fund a core portion of their program that needs to be addressed to be successful. And so as soon as we made that shift, right, suddenly the outcomes were much better for these programs, right? But it took being in conversation and us to listen and to not be hurt that, oh my goodness, like, our current practice of not funding transportation is, hurting, the outcomes, which means hurting, those that we're here to serve. When we take away our ego and we listen, that's the learning opportunity for us, which means now we're more effective, right? And I can give you many examples of where we have learned organizationally about how our practice is something as simple as a question on a year-end report, how we can amend those things so that we can have deeper impact, right? But that's what builds trust, because, if we ask for feedback and we don't act on it, that doesn't build trust, right? But I think that we have had just years of staff and of leadership that have listened, right? And I'm not saying that we've got it right every time, but we are constantly trying to listen and to understand what does our community need, and how could we make sure that our processes, that our procedures, that our programs can help. And I think like impact investment is just a wonderful example of that, right? Housing was an area that our community has said, we need help with. Well, traditional philanthropy didn't allow us to operate in the housing space. And so now we have impact investment, which now we are able to now fund in the housing space. Now, we're not the solution, but we're a part of a solution, right? In a changing narrative about how we can truly flex how housing is, approached in Washtenaw County to be more inclusive and truly supporting those where we're missing help.
Yeah, I think that's important, specifically with impact investing. Like Chris said earlier, those deals or those projects go on for a long period of time, and a lot of times they change. So it's that flexibility and the ability for us to be flexible and stay with the investee and help them through those challenges and to be there for them. I think that's a huge trust builder for them. They're like, oh, wow, thanks for sticking by us. And that kind of thing really helps them understand that during the duration of that investment, we're going to continue to be there for them, whether it be through their, reporting back to us and seeing how things are going. But then even if, again, changes come and they're able to come back to us and say, hey, we need this help now. That's going to be a big deal to be able to gain that trust, because those investments go for longer years too than a grant traditionally has.
It's interesting that you both keep bringing up this issue of time, because as you shift from programmatic grant making to systems change work, that is the real issue, is that it's going to require more time. We have been at some of this work long enough where we can see outcomes, whether we're talking about the community scholarship program or we're talking about the work in aging, but we're talking about a minimum of 6 to 7 years before you really get this really exciting data. And so it's this kind of brick by brick where you're just kind of moving in that direction. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. And now you can speak to these really tangible outcomes. But it's about having the patient capital, building the relationships, and staying in that ecosystem long enough to really have impact that actually changes the way that people are working with one another, the way that they're communicating, what they're communicating to the broader, whether we're talking about funders or other partners, be they government, educational, nonprofit, et cetera. And it's that I feel like is a real difference. So one other question I'd like to ask you is, what are your hopes and goals for where the foundation and even philanthropy goes at this point? Because what we're talking about are real changes, right? Changes from being transactional to being relational, changes from being patriarchal to really coming alongside and being communal. So what are some of the other changes? These quick fixes that are kind of like, oh, we're going to feed everybody with these lunches. It's like, oh, we fed you today, but we don't know what's going to happen to you tomorrow, right? So what does it look like to then move upstream and get to root causes? So what are you seeing, or what are your hopes for where philanthropy goes and where the community foundation goes?
For me, specifically working with impact investing, is to be able to invest in these for-profit or nonprofit organizations and to really get them on their feet and to see the systems change within them, but then also to be able to reinvest those same impact dollars into the next group and into the next group, and to create the system change step by step, city by city, township by township throughout the county. And then that's going to spread, and exponentially throughout. And then also from those individual projects, by working with those local leaders to create the policy changes needed for those projects to succeed is the next thing. And that's the next systems change. And by tying them all together, the hope is that the foundation will become an integral part in making that weaving happen. and then to be able to be there to sustain it too, to make sure that it grows and changes as necessary, so that we don't go backwards. Because again, like Chris said earlier, it's taken years to get to where we are. So it's going to take years to get to where we want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the foundation has continued to evolve, right? And we are by no means a static organization. My hope is that we can continue to, going with the brick by brick theme, right? It's like not only are we having impact with our programs, but we're also like this collective, I don't want to say wall that we're building, but this collective space that we're building, right? Sometimes those bricks are programs, sometimes those bricks are like relationships, right? But once they're set, and it's not just us setting those bricks, like we're setting those bricks together with our community partners, is that becomes a muscle memory, right? And I think that I will say building, going from potential energy to kinetic energy takes a lot of work, right? And it's trying to get everyone together to push that big rock. But once it starts moving, it's amazing how much quicker things can happen, but how much time is really spent collecting enough people to get that stone to move, right? My hope is that for the foundation as a whole, that we can continue to fill that space so that people see us as a philanthropic hub, right? That they come to us and say, it's not just resources, but one of the things that I love now is that I get phone calls quite often on topics that we are not currently funding in, but they just want to have a conversation and say, hey, how would you think about addressing like this particular issue or this particular problem, right? My hope is that through this institutional knowledge that we have, through the lived experience of our staff, through the trainings that we go through to continually stay on top of our game, is that elected officials, community partners, residents, whomever, but they see us as a resource beyond just the dollars, right? And sometimes there's actually more impact through those relationships that we build than through the dollars that are put out into the community. And the more that we are filling that space, I think the greater the impact we can have. Because I think, yes, at the end of the day, you absolutely need dollars to support the development of coordinated solutions, right? I mean, you need it. There's no way around it. But it's the deepening of those relationships and understandings that I think is really the special sauce that gets it across that finish line. And my hope is that we continue to evolve and grow into that space, right? I don't ever want it to be seen as a checkbook to the community, because that is just a portion of what it is that we bring. Just like when we look at nonprofits, they're much more than just a service, right? Elected officials are more than just individuals who vote on policy, right? Or things like that. So I think we need to continue to evolve and to see what are what's the depth that all of us bring, but then how can the community foundation continue to build that space where people feel like they can come, they can trust, and they can have those conversations and really try to get creative, right? Because if the old ways aren't doing it, then we should probably not keep trying to do the same thing over and over again, right? But once again, that requires trust. And I think that right now the foundation, right now we're celebrating how many years, Shannon, now?
60.
60 years, right? 60 years of showing up in our community. That's 60 years of showing up with intentionality, with integrity. And I think that we're positioned beautifully right now to step into that next iteration of how it is that we can continue to serve, Washtenaw County as a whole.
You are both employed at the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation. We are celebrating our 60th anniversary. I'm curious, what do you love about working at the foundation?
I sound like a broken record, going on 15, 16 years, however many here at the foundation. At no point in time has there been anyone employed at the foundation, through my understanding and experience and relationship with, where everyone on staff was here to better our community. And Frances referenced this earlier in that, we are relatively neutral, right? We're not looking to gain from anything that we do, right? But being surrounded, even though we're not a huge staff, but even we were like 10 individuals, there's something different when you show up to work every single day and every person on staff is there looking to try to better our community. We're not here to retire early, right? We're not looking for investment opportunities to, grow our own personal portfolios. It's literally the exact opposite of that. And when you go to work every day focused on bettering our community and the person in the office next to you is doing the exact same thing, that energy hits differently. I mean, I've been in jobs where that wasn't the case, right? And, people were just looking to climb that ladder or like how much money can I get on my check, over the next 2 weeks. And that's just never been here. And that, you can have a hard day at work, but when you drive home, all you're thinking about is, I work with amazing people, and like we didn't get it today, but we're probably going to get it tomorrow, right? And that keeps my bucket full. Like the work can be draining, the work can be hard. Any job can be that way, right? I mean, there's no martyrdom here. But if you want to sustain the work, you have to be in a culture, and you have to be surrounded by good people. And I don't know how we've been so lucky, but in the time that I've been here, we've been surrounded by nothing but amazing folk who truly love our community, are from our community, and want to help our community. And that, to me, is just an absolute gift.
Awesome. Frances?
I totally agree. I think that a lot of the work we do can get heavy. It can get exhausting, both physically and emotionally. And being able to work in a room where everybody gets that. So you're there for each other. It's like somebody doesn't have the energy that day. That's okay. There's somebody else there who's going to be able to have their surplus of energy to help, and vice versa. And it goes day to day. And there is that common thread of we're all just here to do the right thing and to help the community. And we're there to pitch in for each other when needed. And it really feels great. I remember saying that to somebody else leaving one night and getting on the elevator. I'm like, I've never worked in an organization like this before. This is pretty cool.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Thank you both so much. I just want to remind everyone that the name of this podcast is called Brick by Brick. This is the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation. We think about a foundation being laid brick by brick. Understand that the root word philanthropy means love of man. So when we think about our work, truly it's a foundation of love. Well, thank you both so much for having this conversation. Thank you for being a part of this conversation as we conclude this episode of Brick by Brick.